Yeah. So as we're getting ready to come into WrestleMania, you know, there's a lot of moving parts, and we're going to talk about a lot of politics and behind the scenes. But as we're talking about the contract, you're probably, if you're working with Taker and you're working with Shawn and you're in main events, it's probably not a thing where you're wondering, hey, are they going to renew me? You're getting main event payoffs, right? So from a house show perspective, even if the houses weren't what they would be in the future, it's not like you're worried they don't see value in the character.
Right. And we could go back and look at my 97 payoffs. I would complain from time to time.
Really?
I would, yeah. You can check with JR.
I assume that goes to JR.
Yeah,
right?
it was JR. I didn't overdo it, but I would fight the fight when I really believed in it, especially when the houses took off, and then I would see that I was getting less for a main event than I was getting for a semi-main event with half the crowd. So I realized this is not a mathematically fine-tuned process. This is a gut feeling. So JR would say, well, you know, Mick, the shows are selling. He'd say you weren't in the main event. And I'd say, Jim, these shows are selling out before we even announce a main event. It's the strength of the company that's selling it. And I think as somebody who's up here, that I should be factored in a little more than I am. So I didn't complain often. But I complained regularly. So I would say every couple months.
Usually about pay-per-views or house show tours or combination?
Well, combination. But with the pay-per-views, knowing what other guys, kind of getting a feel for what other guys were bringing in, based solely on the buy rates, then I would think that I deserved what someone else got for a similar role in the company. But 97, I probably wasn't making what I should have for main events around the loop.
Let's go back in time,
okay.
1 year to when you first come in.
The sigh comes because I'm like, do I really want to complain about the payments, 25 years after the fact, because the company ended up doing so much for me. But 97 was not a
The company's hurting in 97.
Yeah, company's hurting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say I think I pulled in about $350,000 in 1997 as a full-time wrestler working around the country and the world near the top of the card.
Not a ton of money.
And not a ton of money.
Especially when you deduct expenses out of it.
Expenses, the pain I was in, taxes. So you weren't getting rich. You would need about 10 of those years in a row to even start really getting a comfortable nest egg for the future.
So just thinking back to when you first debuted, did you, as we're going from, say, WrestleMania 12 to 13, financially, did it meet your expectations? Did it exceed your expectations?
Well, let me put in context that when I left WCW, I was making $150. So $350 felt really good to me.
Yes.
It was in 98 when Terry Funk and I were working together and rooming. He said, Cactus, the business is changing. There's going to come a time when someone makes $1 million a year. By that point, Bret was already making $1 million a year. Hogan was making $1 million a year. So that may have been a 97 conversation when Terry came in he would come in and out for short periods of time. But I was not upset with $350 at the time.
In your head, the high watermark, Hall and Nash would call it Sting money.
Yeah.
Was that your high watermark?
Yeah, I thought $750 was as high as you could get.
Yeah.
And I would have been thrilled with that. And by 98, I was making that type of money.
Sure.
But 97, the pay-per-views, I remember there was a question at a meeting about, Vince had a meeting, any questions? And Owen raised his hand. He said, where's the other half of my Mania check? Because it wasn't what it was expected to be. Probably 97.
Yeah, because the buy rate was abysmal.
Buy rate wasn't great. And I think the company had gone out of their way to make sure Mania payoffs were really solid because they wanted that to be the flagship the granddaddy of them all, and it has become that. But at that year, we were, even with the incredible Bret Hart Steve Austin match, the buy rate wasn't. It was a down WrestleMania across the board. And I think a lot of that's probably due to the success of WCW. Like the NWO had just taken over. Yeah.
And it was the hot thing. But, you know, Kevin Nash talked about one of the reasons he wanted to leave the WWF is in that era, you didn't know what kind of year you were going to have until you got your Mania payoff. So I am curious, when Owen raises his hand and says, where's the other half of my Mania payoff? Obviously, he says that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but does Vince try to explain the realities of that buy rate to everyone, or is it just dismissed because of the public forum?
I think it was quickly dismissed.
Yeah.
That's a conversation he would only have with individuals.
Yes.
Jumping ahead to when I was the commissioner, but I remember being asked if I could talk with Edge and Christian, Hardys, Dudleys, and they just gotten their payoff after that pay-per-view, where this is after Edge and Christian had torn the house down with Hardys and kind of set the mold for that amazing ladder match. So now it's the three teams, and I guess they felt like I was still one of the guys, right?
Yes.
They fully understood that I'm not actually the commissioner, right? I'm not actually office. And I said, well, how bad was it? And when they said $10,000, I went, you got $10,000 for that? And so I went to Jim on their behalf and petitioned for more money. He gave me an example of, and it looks, man, it's a bolt of lightning could come down if I say anything construed as being disparaging at all towards The Undertaker. But when I brought up how much we had heard Undertaker made, he goes, well, Undertaker's a tenured veteran. I said, be that as it may, the match with him and Boss Man was thrown together like that. It was not a good match. And to pay anyone, whatever the incredible disparity was, I don't know, it was 50 times or 30 times or 20 times, but it was still, it felt like a slap in the face to those guys getting paid that little. And they did get bumped up from there. But I think Vince always wanted, as a guy who strives to have talent reaching for the brass ring, I think he wanted it known that only when you got that brass ring could you make that kind of pay-per-view main event money.
Do you think Vince also hated the idea of paying 6 guys in a match?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe so.
I've just heard over the years that if you have a main event and it's a tag team, got to pay 4 guys instead of 2.
I mean, that's
a simple deal, but just curious.